Hello, fellow Doctor Who fans, and welcome to a Once and Future King edition of Who on Who, the podcast devoted to the review of classic series Doctor Who DVDs in no particular order. I'm your host, David Huey, and thank you for joining me today as we review the Sylvester McCoy adventure Battlefield. But before we do that, let's head over to the email box and check out some feedback email.
Here's the mail, it never fails. It makes me want to wag my tail. When it comes, I want to wail.
Alright, this first email comes from way down under, from the land down under. Don't worry, I'm not going to break into that annoying song. Clive Brooks from Australia, who goes by the moniker of Bad Wolf, sent this to me on July 14th, which... for anyone from France, that's Bastille Day. Anybody over here in the United States, that's David Huey's birthday. So he actually sent this to me on my birthday, and it says, "Happy birthday to you, David, and I hope you get all the ice cream that you want. Have just finished the Unearthly Child podcast and was pleased to see that you brought up a normally forgotten point. Doctor Who was a children's program. I remember watching the first episode on that fateful day in November 1963. The program was late due to some boring assassination story from America. Well, it was boring to a 9-year-old, when the most promising TV program of my life was about to start. But back to the point of this letter. Over the years, Doctor Who fans have forgotten this important fact. They look for faults, inconsistencies, complaining about the director, how they would do it, etc., etc. Doctor Who should just be enjoyed for what it is. An escape from the world and a chance to use your imagination. In other words, watch it through your inner child's eye and you will enjoy it. This has worked for me for all these years. I still enjoy it now as much as I did in 1963. I must say that your podcast is a breath of fresh air and is always entertaining and informative. Your comments are constructive and to the point. You are up there with the boys at the Doctor Who podcast. Always look forward to these podcasts. Down here at the bottom of the world, we do not have the lively scene that you have in America, and of course over the pond in the UK, so I have to rely on overseas programs to keep up with the news on Doctor Who. Possible suggestion for future episode? Earthshock. This is a much maligned episode of the Davison era, but it is the only story where a companion dies. I can hear the cheering now that Adric was gone, but he wasn't that bad. I can name a few worse. Keep up the good work, and I know I will enjoy whatever episode you pick. Also, I like the idea of a co-host. The boys from Podshock were great, but it was even better when your son joined you. Great once again. Have a happy birthday with your family, Clive Brooks." Clive, thank you very, very much. That meant so much to me that you took, time out of your day to write me and wish me a happy birthday. And it was a great birthday. It was the big number 43 for anyone keeping score out there. But I had a wonderful time with my family. And shortly after my birthday, we took a family vacation to Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia. So any of you over here on this side of the Atlantic, and even those of you who are adventurous over on the other side and want to come over here, Colonial Williamsburg was a lot of fun. We went to Busch Gardens up there in Williamsburg, Virginia, rode all 5 of the roller coasters, had a great time. I've got some pictures up on Facebook. If you're one of my Facebook friends, check them out. And hopefully you will enjoy them. All right, next email comes from Trevor Smith. Trevor writes in about the Unearthly Child. He says, "Hi Dave, just finished listening to your review of the Unearthly Child DVD. Really enjoyed it. Always interesting hearing another angle. The sketches that you referred to were made for Doctor Who Night that was broadcast on BBC Two in 1999. A whole evening devoted to all things Who. They showed the 1996 TV movie and, for the first time ever, the unbroadcast version of Unearthly Child, which is also on the Unearthly Child DVD that I reviewed, as well as the aforementioned sketches. Now you can find bits of it on YouTube. One of the stars of the sketches is Mark Gatiss, writer of the 9th Doctor story The Unquiet Dead, and guest star of the 10th Doctor story The Lazarus Experiment. Cheers, Trevor Smith." Trevor, I believe I wrote you back and said this, but I'm going to say this here on the podcast as well. Thank you so much for the flesh out. Obviously, I'm doing, all my own research and show notes. I can't cover all the bases. I'm just not that good or really have that much time. And I always appreciate when people can add little nuggets here and there because, number one, I'm a trivia fanatic, and number two, when I was watching the sketches, Mark Gatiss actually plays the Doctor in my favorite of the sketches, where the inept aliens are trying to destroy the world or whatever they're doing. And I kept looking at him and saying, man, he looks familiar from somewhere. And I just couldn't place him, and I'm ashamed to admit that I couldn't. But, of course, I know, who Mark Gatiss is and enjoyed his performance immensely in The Lazarus Experiment. But thank you for connecting the dots for me. I appreciate that very much. This next email comes from Mark Nuttall, who writes in regarding Battlefield, the story that we're going to review today. Great choice, David. Love Battlefield. It's got unit, the brig, battles, bullets, bombs, and blasts, knights in shining armor with lasers, the Doctor is Merlin, and of course, Bessie. What's not to like? The story is pretty easy to follow, which is a bonus with the McCoy stories. Okay, there are lots of holes in the plot, etc., but it's just such a romp. I know it's not particularly well liked, but it's good, old-fashioned Doctor Who hokum. I'm not sure. I've heard hokum used before. I think over here in the States, particularly in the Midwest, they don't use hokum, much to my chagrin. They actually say hooey, which is my last name. They say, oh, that's a bunch of hooey, or you're full of hooey. So believe me, I've heard that plenty in my life. But he goes on to say, I really think that Matt Smith should travel to a different dimension and encounter Morgaine. Stephen Moffat could do a terrific spin on that, and it would be a terrific way to tie classic and new Who together. Mark Nuttall. Mark, fantastic idea. Yeah, you're right. I mean, if anybody could do it, Moffat's the guy. I think that he really could. It could be an interesting story. I will go more into my own particular opinion about this story in a moment after we get rolling along here. But again, thank you very much for that. All right. Now, before we get rolling, I also want one last shout out to a writer in my last podcast, a gentleman named Istvan Hoidu, Istvan. If you're listening, I am taking your advice on the theme music change that you suggested, and I am going to start incorporating the correct theme song for whichever DVD I am reviewing. So since this is a Sylvester McCoy adventure, we are going to go ahead and set the TARDIS controls to September 6, 1989. Everybody tease out your big hair, put on your parachute pants. We're heading back to the 80s to the Doctor's 156th adventure, Battlefield. Hang on, here we go. Alright, we are back and ready to review the 7th Doctor story, Battlefield. I'm reviewing this as a story but also as a DVD set because this is one of those special edition DVD sets that comes on 2 discs. There are 2 versions of Battlefield. There's the classic version as it originally aired on the first DVD, and then on the second DVD there's a I guess you would call it an enhanced version. It's cut to be shown like a movie, without the serialized breaks in between episodes. They've also enhanced some of the special effects and modified it. I did watch both versions. I preferred the original version over the extended version because, frankly, there really wasn't that much difference to me when I was looking at them. So you can sort of file that away in the For What It's Worth department. It was interesting to finally review this DVD because originally, I'm going back here, I'm kind of lifting up the podcasting curtain for you so you can kind of see the goings-on and the history of this particular podcast. I had never intended or planned on doing my own podcast. What had happened was I was with my wife and my kids. We were picnicking on the banks of the Tennessee River and enjoying a beautiful day. And I was standing there looking out over the pristine waters of the Tennessee River when a hand came out from the bosom of the waters, shimmering like in samite, holding up a Doctor Who DVD, and threw the DVD at me, signifying by divine providence that I was to take that up and take the mantle as well and the responsibility for reviewing Doctor Who DVDs in this podcasting format. True story, by the way. But anyway, I decided to go ahead and embrace my destiny as the once and future podcasting host of Who on Who. And let's talk a little bit about Battlefield. All King Arthur jokes aside, I think most people are aware that this is an Arthurian story that is set in the not-too-distant future. They make a few subtle and sly references to the fact that it is somewhat in Ace's personal future, just judging by the amount that they charge for a drink at the pub, and different comments that the Doctor makes to her along the way. There are aliens, and UNIT is involved in. These aliens are actually knights. Yes, I don't mean knight as in the opposite of day, but knights in armor with laser weapons, and the Doctor, of course, gets involved. One of the good knights, a man by the name of Anselin, recognizes the Doctor right away at the outset, and refers to him as Merlin, which seems to confuse the Doctor somewhat. But Anselin refers to him riding bombs all the time. He says that although he doesn't recognize his outward appearance, that does change, and he says that Merlin still can't disguise himself from him. So they're making allusions to the fact that at some point in the Doctor's future, he may be Merlin. The Doctor also goes on to figure out that these knights and Morgaine herself are actually from another dimension, and where they're bringing their war here to our dimension. So the story gets a bit convoluted from there, at least in my opinion. There is a new Brigadier Bambera, a woman of African descent, who I think that was cast intentionally so that she would be as opposite of our beloved Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart as possible, at least on the surface, but in many ways seems very similar to him personality-wise, and I think in the way that she handles things. Clearly she's her own person, but one of the characters that I actually did like very much in this episode. Of course, that brings up the Brig, the man himself, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, and his first and only televised appearance with the Seventh Doctor. I did love their interchange when they first met. The Brig recognized the Doctor right away, even though the Doctor had regenerated a couple of times since the last time he had seen him in Modern Undead when he was the Fifth Doctor. But he said, after all, Doctor, who else could it be? And I thought that was very clever. There's also a lot made of the fact that in the original production of this story, the brigadier, our brigadier, was going to be killed off. And at the last minute, the production team changed their mind, which is a wonderful thing, because as a Doctor Who fan, I'm still holding out that the brigadier will show up in Doctor Who someday. He's been on the Sarah Jane Adventures, which was wonderful to see him, but would love to see him interact with, well, I assume now the 11th Doctor, since Tennant's tour of duty is done filming, and I don't believe that the brig has made it on there. This story overall, I came into it with pretty high expectations. It had been a while. I remember seeing this, I believe, on videotape, but it's been, many years ago. So I was excited when the DVD came out. The story is written by Ben Aronovich, who also wrote Remembrance of the Daleks, which is probably my favorite Sylvester McCoy story to date. So I was really excited and looking forward to seeing this episode and how it played out. Overall, I thought it's like with any Doctor Who adventure, you sort of have to bypass the times, as it were. When we watch adventures that were filmed in the 60s, there are certain things that they predict about the near future that may or may not come to pass, and you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. The same holds true for this. This is clearly set in the 80s. You can sort of tell by the hairstyles and other things about it, but all kitschiness aside, I just had some fundamental problems with the story. I've heard and read some other reviews. Some people love it. I read the email earlier from Mark Nuttall, who loves the story. Mark went on to say what's not to like. Mark, I agree with you. On the surface, I look at this. Okay, I have said before on my show, I love Sylvester McCoy. I love his portrayal of the Doctor, the Andrew Cartmel, quote, master plan of making the Doctor more mysterious. But I think they overstepped their bounds here a little bit. It's one thing to surround the Doctor and shroud him in mystery. That's fine, but trying to indicate that the Doctor could or should be Merlin, I don't know. I thought that maybe was taking it just a bit too far. First thing. Second thing, it has all the ingredients of a fantastic story. Okay? It has nods to the Doctor and Liz Shaw from UNIT. It's got UNIT. It's got the Brigadier. It's got even an appearance from Bessie, although they never explained why Bessie's license plate changed from Who 1 to Who 7 for whatever reason, or why the Doctor had to take that weird disco ball looking thing and stick it onto her onto the steering wheel to make Bessie shoot like a rocket. Either way, doesn't matter. It has all of the ingredients for the Doctor Who fan to sit there and go, yes, yes, yes. Ace, love her as a companion. Ace getting to interact with the Brigadier, which admittedly was enjoyable. I did like that, and I did like her interaction and her sense of, wait a minute, it's my job to cover the Doctor's back now, not yours anymore. And it was nice that the Brig sort of passed that torch off to her at the end. All those things were should have been realized better. I guess what I'm saying in a nutshell is it's kind of like this. Okay, let's say you're making a stew, and every ingredient you put in is an ingredient that by itself you love. So logically, you throw it all together, it's going to be fantastic. But it just doesn't work. So I'm afraid that I just didn't like the story. I walked away with a sense of just, I would have rather they approached this in a different way, or dialed back a little bit on the whole. I think they could have redone the story and revisited the story without putting the Arthurian elements into it. And Morgaine could have still been a sorceress slash despot or whatever from another world or even another dimension. That's fine. Her foot soldiers with the lasers, like maybe similar to stormtroopers from Star Wars, something like that. All of that could have worked without the Arthurian elements. Those just seem to me to weight down the story. And so, therefore, in looking at it objectively, I have to give this 2 out of 5 cloister bells. Now, I do want to stress that I wanted to like this story a lot more than I did. It just didn't seem to deliver in every front like I wanted it to. So, if you agree with me, great. If you disagree, hey, that's what this is all about. And as Doctor Who fans, we're all passionate about this show that we love so much. Feel free to write me in, at david@whoonwho.com. Drop me an email. Let me know. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. I'm always open to give something another look. If you have a different perspective on it, please share. In the meantime, I will move on, because one of the great things that is afforded to us on this DVD set are the extras themselves, which are phenomenal. Alright, if you like DVD extras, well, I believe that this set delivers. And for that reason alone, I believe it is definitely one to pick up and add to your Doctor Who collection. If you're a 7th Doctor fan like me, this DVD actually is I believe the last DVD for the final season to be released before the show went on hiatus. This was actually the first adventure in the final season, and the rest of them have all been released. So we actually have a complete Doctor Who season without having to purchase it in the form of a box set like the Key to Time series or the Trial of a Time Lord, which was kind of nice, but that's neither here nor there with the extras. There are a few documentaries on here that are very interesting. The first one is called Storm Over Avalon, which is a very frank and open discussion about the production, about filming the story, writing the story. They talk to Mike Kerrigan, the director, Sophie Aldred, who plays Ace, Ben Aronovich, the writer, Marcus Gilbert, who played Anselin, Angela Bruce, who played Brigadier Bambera. It was very nice to see her on there as well. Sylvester McCoy, Nicholas Courtney, the great Gene Marsh, and of course Andrew Cartmel. And I thought it was very enlightening. They went on to discuss a lot of the aspects of writing the story, location, just a lot of interesting nuggets regarding the whole process, and how and why it was acted out certain ways, or why certain things were portrayed. And I'm really glad I watched this, because when I was watching the story, I thought that there were a couple of times that McCoy was sort of overacting, I thought, a little bit, being overly dramatic. And so it really helped me out to watch this documentary, and I think he sort of gets a sense of that now, years later. So he's explaining his process and his rationale for why he approached it that particular way, and it helps. I think it helps to sort of soften it up a little bit, and so I highly recommend that. There is a documentary specifically on the history of writing Battlefield called Past and Future King, which goes into discussions with Andrew Cartmel, Ben Aronovich, the writer, Sophie Aldred, Sylvester McCoy, and Mike Kerrigan, the director. What I found very interesting here, and I have to confess that I watched the extras actually before I sat down and watched Battlefield, and in going over my show notes and getting ready for the podcast today, I'm wondering if maybe this didn't color my opinion a little bit, but Ben Aronovich actually says that he was disappointed with the final product. He actually went so far as to call Battlefield a failure, and Battlefield was supposed to be sort of the opposite but equal, the other side of the coin to Remembrance of the Daleks, which dealt with the Doctor's past. This was supposed to deal somewhat with the Doctor's future, and I think he was disappointed, sort of like what I said, using the stew analogy. I think that he had all the right ingredients, but for whatever reason, when all those ingredients were put together in that one story, it just didn't work as well as he hoped it would, and probably as well as a lot of fans hoped it would. But all the same, still a very interesting documentary. Now, I would venture to guess that most Doctor Who fans know about the infamous water tank incident. There's a very interesting documentary that discusses the close call that happened on set with a water tank that Sophie Aldred was submerged in for a scene for Battlefield, and came very, very close to getting seriously hurt, if not possibly drowned. She could have been cut to ribbons on broken glass because the tank broke. But they go into a lot of detail about the accident. They actually have studio footage from when they were filming and when the tank broke and all that, and it was scary. I mean, even watching it, however many years later, and knowing that Sophie's fine, but I could have put myself in that situation and been completely freaked out. And Sophie Aldred says she owes her life to this day to Sylvester McCoy for shouting to the stagehands to get her out of that tank when they did. And he has such a commanding voice, using his, I guess you'd call it his Shakespearean voice, and he intoned it in such a way that they didn't even stop to question him. They just grabbed her, pulled her out of the tank, and shortly afterward, the glass on the side of the water tank burst, and Lord knows what would happen to her. So, very interesting to see that. And normally, when you get to see little nuggets here and there, you don't expect anything that is that death-defying or exciting, but it is very good. There's also a studio recording from June of 1989 that allows you to see some things that were trimmed out of the show, some scenes in slightly different formats as they were being filmed and looked at, and the director was trying different approaches and different things here and there. These things tend to be a little dry for me, but I did watch it. I sweated out like I have sworn myself to do, and it was fun. It was fun to watch, but to me, I tend to get caught up in how you're watching the filming, but you've already, in the case where you've already seen it, okay, or you remember it a different way, and then you watch them filming this, and you think, well, wait a minute, why are they showing me this? They didn't film it this way, or they cut this out, or whatever. But it's just interesting. Like I said, I actually saw the extras before watching Battlefield, so that wasn't such an issue for me this time around. But I have experienced that on other discs. Still well worth a look. But that brings me to the next documentary, which I thought was very, very well done, and very nice to see. And it's a documentary about Jean Marsh, the actress who plays Morgaine. She is the documentary is called From Kingdom to Queen, and they do that because she got her start in Doctor Who playing Sarah Kingdom, who some Doctor Who fans refer to Sarah Kingdom as a companion, because I believe she took one trip in the TARDIS, but she was only ever in one adventure. So I don't know that I would classify Sarah Kingdom as a companion, but Jean Marsh is a very interesting retrospective on working with the Doctor Who production team back then in the 60s, in the 80s, working with William Hartnell. Just her overall experience. She's a fantastic actress, and she deserves this kind of attention for the body of her work. The DVD extras also include the trails and continuity segments that usually precede each episode before it aired during the week. It has the photo gallery, the always invaluable info text, which I like very, very much, and a great, and I mean a simply fantastic audio commentary. I mean, the audio commentary should get 4 out of 5 stars. It's a blast. It's Sophie Aldred, both of the Brigadiers, Ben Aronovich, and Andrew Cartmel. So it's just a lot of fun to listen to them. There are a lot of little pearls of wisdom and inside information, a lot of reminiscing back and forth about different things that were happening while certain scenes were being filmed, or about some of the actors that came in to play the guest spots in this particular adventure, and just a lot of fun. I wish that Sylvester McCoy had been there for the commentary. I just think it would have added a little bit more, but when you look at the fact that you've got 5 people in there already sitting together doing commentary, putting McCoy in there with them probably would have been a little too crowded of a commentary room, and way too much talking over each other. These folks here actually blended together very, very well. So I would say give the commentary, I would definitely recommend that you give the commentary a listen. Not just a suggestion there. I think that it's well worth a listen, as it is, for folks who are fans of commentary. I've discovered from talking to a lot of my listeners that many of you listen to all the commentaries on all the discs, and if that's your thing, I think that's fantastic. I've, of course, said before that there are some commentaries that just don't trip my trigger, but this one was definitely well worth it. So if you're like me, if you're kind of one of those fence sitters and you're not sure whether you want to go back and listen to the audio commentary to the DVD, this one is really good and well worth it. So I say, give it a tumble, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. So anyway, that brings us to the close of the extras. I did not find any Easter eggs on this disc, which was very disappointing, and I was kind of hoping that there would be some, but there wasn't. And considering it was a 2-disc set, while I was recording this, I actually paused this and went back and double-checked both discs again, because it just seems so unlikely to me that I wouldn't find one. However, it's not out of the realm of possibility, of course. So if anyone else who's a little more nimble-fingered or sharp-minded than myself, which is, again, not a huge stretch to consider, if you did find an Easter egg on one of the 2 DVDs in the Battlefield set, please get in touch with me and let me know. You can reach me via email, david@whoonwho.com. Also, I wanted to make a point earlier when I was talking about the story. I did not comment on the absolutely fantastic prosthetic makeup effects that were used for the creature that that Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart faced off against. That was just phenomenal. I mean, and especially given the time. And so I have to take at least a couple seconds here and remark that was probably one of the more impressive makeup effects I've seen, and I would say even holds up well to what we see in the modern show regarding prosthetics, not, of course, related to CGI. But anyway, did want to make a comment about that as well. So that brings us to a close. As always, as I'm closing up here, I like to thank all of you again for listening. I'd like to remind you of our website, which is www.whoonwho.com. We have a good forum there with a core group of people that are talking about all things new Who, classic Who, comments, suggestions for future DVDs to be discussed. And speaking of future DVDs to be discussed, in my next episode, I will be discussing the classic Tom Baker adventure City of Death with a very special co-host, the Tin Dog himself from Tin Dog Podcast. So if you have not ever listened to Tin Dog Podcast, why aren't you? You need to go to www.tin-dog.co.uk. I believe that web address is correct without actually going out and double checking. I think you can get his podcast there. I know you can get it on iTunes. He's got a great style. He talks about all things Doctor Who, talks about Big Finish, talks about Torchwood, talks about everything Doctor Who related. And I am just as pleased as could be that he's agreed to come on the show with me and review City of Death, because that is a huge adventure, and it's going to require two of us to probably get through all of the meat and potatoes on that one. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Again, you can email me, david@whoonwho.com. You can find me on Facebook, David Huey. I'd like to give a special hello to another listener from down under in Australia, Susan Myers, who has friend requested me on Facebook. Thank you, Susan. And I appreciate that very much, and thank you for listening. And you can also follow me on Twitter. It is Twitter/David Huey. And I've got enough people following me now that I feel like the guy on the Verizon commercials, where he walks up and says, can you hear me now? And there's like a million people walking behind him. I don't have that many followers, but I will say this about Twitter. I'm not one of those people that tweets every detail of my life away. So please don't feel like you're missing out on anything. I'm not going to send a tweet every time I'm doing anything, like breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. I'm just not one of those people. So I could go a day or two without updating Twitter. I'm really bad about it. But I appreciate all of you who are willing to follow me on Twitter and at least show some modicum of interest in what David Huey is doing at any given time. So once again, I just want to thank all of you for listening to the show. Please send me your comments and your feedback. Love to hear from all of you, and I will talk to you very soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.